A 911 call shatters the silence of a quiet suburban home. A teenage girl gasps for help, her own mother's voice screaming in the background. By the time police arrive, the walls are smeared with blood, a kitchen knife lies discarded, and the only witness is the daughter who wasn't supposed to survive. This wasn't a random attack. This was a mother's darkest secret, unraveling in the most brutal way possible. What drove a devout Muslim wife to stab her child? The answer is more twisted than anyone could imagine. Welcome to Vic's Crime Stories, where the stories you think you know are never what they seem. Behind every crime, there's a story you haven't heard, a twist you didn't see coming. This is Vic's Crime Stories, digging deeper into the cases that shocked the world. Don't just watch, question everything. The night the Mirza family shattered began like any other in their pristine Dallas home. A soft hum of the air conditioner, the distant chirp of crickets, the glow of streetlights casting long rectangles across the manicured lawn. But inside, behind those tall, polished doors, a girl was fighting for her life. When the first police car screeched into the driveway, its red and blue lights splashing against the white brick walls, the officers expected a break-in. A robbery gone wrong. Maybe. What they found was far more disturbing. 17-year-old Aisha Mirza lay slumped against the staircase, her school uniform soaked in blood, her breath shallow and ragged. Just a few feet away, her mother, Leah, stood trembling, not over her daughter's body, not crying out for help, but frozen near the kitchen doorway, her hands smeared red. And then, movement. A shadow darting out the back door. A man, running. The detective who arrived next took one look at the scene and knew. This wasn't a stranger's crime. The front door was untouched, the lock unbroken, no shattered glass, no signs of struggle, except where Aisha had clearly been chased, cornered, attacked. And a knife? A kitchen blade, still damp from the sink, now tossed carelessly onto the tiles as if it were nothing more than a discarded spoon. But let's rewind, because to understand how a mother could do this, you have to see the family as they were before that night. Leah Mirza was the kind of woman people noticed. Tall, elegant, her hijab always perfectly draped, her Instagram feed a curated dream of family picnics, charity events, and delicate cups of chai. To the outside world, she was devout, a loving wife, a doting mother. But Aisha knew better. For months, she had watched the cracks form. The late-night dance classes that ran too long. The way her mother's phone always tilted away, just slightly, when Imran walked into the room. The gifts, sudden, expensive, that appeared with no occasion. A new handbag, a gold bracelet. From a student, Leah would say with a smile, too quick to be real. Then came the day Aisha opened the wrong gym bag. It was an accident, really. She'd grabbed what she thought was her own duffel after practice, only to unzip it and find a phone she didn't recognize. And when the screen lit up, message after message, names she didn't know. Amir, Omar, Zed, words no daughter should ever see her mother write. That phone became Aisha's secret, her proof. She tucked it under her mattress, checked it at night, watched as the messages grew bolder. The meetings, the hotels, the lies stacking up like a house of cards just waiting to collapse. And then, the final betrayal. One evening, when Imran was away on business, Aisha heard laughter from her parents' bedroom. Not her mother's usual polite chuckle, but something lower, unfamiliar. She crept down the hall, pressed her ear to the door, and then she did what any child would do. She looked. What she saw would haunt her forever. Her mother, tangled in the sheets with a man who wasn't her father. A man who turned, spotted Aisha in the doorway, and froze. Leah's face, first shock, then fury. Not guilt, not shame, rage. That was the moment Aisha should have run. But she didn't. She stood her ground, pulled out her own phone, and did the unthinkable. She recorded it. And that was the moment Leah Mirza decided her daughter was no longer family. She was a problem to be solved. Aisha Mirza was no longer just a daughter. She had become a detective in her own home. Every whispered phone call, every sudden errand, every time her mother's car pulled out of the driveway after dark, Aisha took note. She watched the clock tick past midnight on school nights, listening for the garage door to creak open, for the careful footsteps on the stairs. Leia thought she was being discreet, but a daughter's eyes missed nothing. It started with small things. The unfamiliar perfume clinging to Leia's scarf. The way she would jump when her phone buzzed, quickly silencing it before anyone could ask. Then came the receipts. Hotel bills crumpled at the bottom of her purse. Restaurant charges from places Aisha had never heard of. But the real proof came one rainy Tuesday afternoon, when Aisha decided to follow her. She waited until Leia left for her usual dance class, then slipped out after her, keeping a safe distance as her mother's car wound through the city streets. The destination wasn't a dance studio. It was a hotel, one of those sleek, anonymous buildings downtown where no one asked questions. Aisha watched from across the street as Leia stepped inside, her stomach twisting when a man emerged from the lobby to meet her. Zed, tall, handsome, his arms sliding around Leia's waist like he had done 100 times before. Aisha's hand shook as she raised her phone, snapping photo after photo. The way they leaned into each other. The way her mother laughed. A sound Aisha hadn't heard at home in months. She thought if she could just show her father the truth, he would fix it. He would make it stop. She didn't understand, yet that some secrets are knives. And once they're pulled out, there's no controlling who they cut. When she finally confronted Leia, it wasn't the scene she had imagined. There were no tears, no apologies. Just her mother's face, going very still, then crumpling into something desperate. "Your father will divorce me," Leia whispered, her voice breaking. "We'll lose everything. The house, the money, our lives." She reached for Aisha, her fingers cold. "You don't want that, do you? Think of your future." Then came the bribes. A trip to Paris, a new laptop, cash, folded into an envelope, and pressed into Aisha's hands like a shameful secret. "Forget what you saw," Leia pleaded. "It's just a mistake. It doesn't mean anything." But Aisha had seen the way her mother looked at Zed. She knew what it meant. The final betrayal happened in the one place Aisha had always felt safe, her parents' bedroom. She came home early from school, the house too quiet, and that's when she heard it. The murmur of voices, the creak of the bed. She pushed the door open slowly, her heart hammering, and there they were. Leia and Zed, tangled in the sheets, the room thick with the scent of perfume and sweat. For a second, no one moved. Then Zed sat up, his eyes widening. "She's just a kid," he muttered, scrambling for his shirt. "She won't talk." But Leia knew better. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and in that moment, Aisha saw something she would never forget. Not anger, not fear, calculation. "You don't know my daughter," Leia said softly, and the chill in her voice was worse than any scream. Aisha ran. She ran to her room, locked the door, and did the only thing she could think of. She pressed record. The video was shaky, blurred with tears, but it was enough. The proof was in her hands. What she didn't know yet was that proof could be dangerous. That some people would do anything to keep their secrets buried. Even a mother. Even her own child. The air in the Mirza household had grown thick with unsaid words and unspoken threats. Aisha sat on her bed, fingers trembling as she dialed her father's number. The phone barely had time to ring once before the door flew open. There stood Leia, her face a mask of fury, eyes burning with a fire Aisha had never seen before. "You think you can destroy me?" Leia's voice was low, dangerous. "You think I'll let you ruin everything I've built?" Aisha barely had time to react before her mother was upon her. The phone clattered to the floor, the call still connecting, as Leia's hands closed around her throat. The world narrowed to the wild look in her mother's eyes, the spit flying from her lips as she screamed. Then came the glint of steel, a kitchen knife, snatched from the nightstand, raised high. What happened next was a blur of motion and terror. Aisha twisted, kicked, fought with the strength of the desperate. The knife slashed downward, missing her face by inches, tearing through fabric and skin. Blood bloomed bright and hot across her school blouse. Somewhere in the chaos, the phone on the floor picked up the sounds, the grunts, the screams, the sickening thud of bodies hitting walls. 911, what's your emergency? Aisha's voice was ragged, barely more than a gasp. It's my mom. She stabbed me. Please hurry. Leia froze at the words. For one heartbeat, two, the world stood still. Then reality came crashing back. The knife, the blood, the open phone line. She turned to Zed, who stood paralyzed in the doorway, his face white with shock. Help me, Leia ordered, her voice eerily calm now. We have to make this look like a break-in. And just like that, the scene transformed from one horror to another. Zed, moving like a puppet on strings, overturned chairs, smashed a vase. Leia wiped the knife handle clean, pressed it into Zed's shaking hands to leave his prints, all while Aisha bled onto the carpet, her breath coming in shallow, wet gasps. They were still staging the scene when the first police cruiser pulled up outside. Sirens wailed. Doors slammed. Zed took one look out the window and bolted out the back door, his shoes leaving bloody footprints on the tile. The officers found Leia kneeling beside her daughter, hands pressed to the wound, her clothes soaked in red. Someone broke in, she sobbed. They attacked us, my baby. But the detective wasn't looking at her tears. He was looking at the blood smeared on Leia's sleeves, the way it streaked up her arms, as if she'd been the one holding the knife. The broken window with glass scattered inside the house, not outside, where it should have been if someone had broken in. Why's your daughter's blood on your sleeves, Mrs. Mirza? The detective asked quietly. The answer, when it came, was more complicated than anyone could have imagined. This wasn't just about love or lust or even rage. This was about survival. Leia's entire life in America depended on her marriage to Imran. Her visa, her status, her right to stay, all tied to those wedding vows. If Aisha exposed the affairs, if Imran filed for divorce, Leia would be deported back to a country she hadn't called home in decades. And then there was the money, the life insurance policy, the bank accounts, the house in her name. All of it would vanish if the marriage ended. Every secret deposit, every hidden transaction, every carefully laundered dollar gone. In that moment, with the knife in her hand and her daughter's life bleeding out before her, Leia hadn't seen a child she'd raised. She'd seen the end of everything. The 911 call played in the courtroom months later, Aisha's weak voice echoing off the walls as Leia sat stone-faced in the defendant's chair. The jury didn't need to hear the rest. They'd seen the photos of Aisha's wounds. They'd heard Zed's confession. They'd watched the security footage of Leia buying the burner phone, the receipts from hotels, the paper trail of lies. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, Leia didn't cry. She simply turned to look at Aisha, now healed but forever scarred, and whispered two words that sent chills through the room. Worth it. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of machines, keeping time with Aisha's heartbeat. Bandages wrapped around her torso, her arms, her hands, each one a reminder of how close she'd come to dying at the hands of the woman who was supposed to love her most. But when the detective entered with a notepad and solemn eyes, Aisha didn't flinch. She reached for her phone with fingers still swollen from surgery, and with a resolve that belied her 17 years, handed over the evidence that would seal her mother's fate. My mom chose her lies over me, Aisha whispered, the words hanging heavy in the antiseptic air. The video played clearly, Leia and Zed in that intimate moment, the damning conversation afterward. No jury in the world could watch that and doubt what kind of woman Leia Mirza truly was. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation on the day of reckoning. Leia sat perfectly composed at the defense table, her tailored suit and carefully arranged hijab presenting the picture of wronged innocence. Her lawyer spun tales of temporary insanity, of a mother pushed to the brink by a rebellious daughter. The performance might have worked, might have swayed at least some of the jury, until the prosecutor stood and played that 911 call for all to hear. Aisha's ragged breathing filled the chamber, the terror in her voice as she gasped for help. And then, crystal clear over the line, Leia's enraged scream, "You'll ruin everything." The words echoed off the wood-paneled walls, sucking the air from the room. You could see the moment each juror's opinion hardened, the exact second they all realized. This was no crime of passion. This was calculated. Cold. When the foreman stood to deliver the verdict, Leah didn't sob or collapse. She simply raised her chin, as if she'd expected nothing less from a world that had never understood her. Guilty. 25 years. Beside her, Zed slumped forward, his 10-year sentence feeling like a death knell for the young life he'd thrown away. But just when everyone thought the story had reached its end, the detectives made one final discovery. Buried in Leah's phone records, in bank statements going back years, was proof of a fourth affair. With Imran's own business partner, a man who had sat in that very courtroom every day of the trial, his face a mask of appropriate concern. A man who had known about the other lovers, who had helped funnel money, who had perhaps even known what Leah planned to do that terrible night. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. How many people had been caught in Leah's web? How many lies had she spun to keep her perfect life from crumbling? As the prison gates closed behind her, one thing became painfully clear. Even locked away, Leah Mirza's secrets continued to destroy lives. The daughter who survived her, the husband who'd loved her, the men who believed her, all left picking up pieces of a puzzle that would never fully make sense. And somewhere, in a quiet office with the blinds drawn, a businessman packed up his desk and disappeared before the detectives could ask their questions. Because the truth about Leah Mirza, it was always worse than anyone imagined. As the prison doors clanged shut behind Leah Mirza, we're left with questions that linger like smoke in an empty room. Was this a woman pushed to the edge by circumstance, her back against the wall with no way out but violence? Or was she always the puppeteer, pulling strings in the shadows, calculating every move with ice in her veins? Look at the facts, the affairs, the lies, the way she looked at her own daughter and saw an obstacle rather than a child. But then consider the pressure she faced, the visa, the money, the fear of losing everything she'd built. The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere in the gray spaces between. So now I turn to you, the viewers who followed this twisted tale from beginning to end. What's your verdict? If you believe Aisha got the justice she deserved, that no excuse could ever justify a mother's blade against her child, comment 1. But if you think there are still pieces missing to this puzzle, that Leah's story isn't quite as simple as it seems, comment 0. Let your voice be heard in the comments below, because in cases like these, everyone becomes part of the jury. And remember, this is just one story in a world full of darkness masquerading as light. Next time on Vic's Crime Stories, we'll pull back the curtain on another shocking case. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the most dangerous criminals aren't always the ones hiding in shadows. Sometimes, they're the ones standing right beside us, smiling as they tell their lies. This is Vic, signing off, but the stories? They're just getting started.